The Poltergeist. The Benson family had always been known for their peaceful demeanor. When they moved into their new house on Willow Lane, they were excited for a fresh start. The house, an old Victorian with ivy-clad walls and creaky wooden floors, seemed perfect. It had stood vacant for years, a relic of a bygone era, but the Bensons saw potential in its dusty grandeur. The first few weeks were uneventful. The family, Mark, Laura, and their teenage daughter Emily, settled into their routines, adjusting to their new home. However, as the days turned into weeks, odd occurrences began to disrupt the tranquility of their lives. It started with minor disturbances. Objects would be misplaced, but they chalked it up to their own forgetfulness. A book would be found in a room where no one remembered leaving it, or the kitchen cabinet doors would be found open when they were sure they had closed them. Small things, easily dismissed. But then, the incidents escalated. Emily was the first to experience something truly unsettling. One night, she was woken by the sound of her bedroom door slamming shut. She checked her room, but everything seemed normal. The door, which had been open, was now closed tightly, and there was no sign of anyone else around. She dismissed it as a draft or a simple malfunction. Things grew worse. Laura started to hear whispers at night, faint and unintelligible, but they were there. Sometimes, she would wake up to find her bedclothes thrown off, as if someone had been tugging at them. Mark, skeptical of the supernatural, tried to explain away these incidents, attributing them to the house settling or old pipes making noise. One evening, the family sat down for dinner. As they enjoyed their meal, a loud crash echoed from upstairs. Rushing to investigate, they found that a vase had shattered on the floor, its pieces scattered across the hallway. The vase had been on a high shelf, and there was no plausible way it could have fallen on its own. They were starting to feel unnerved, but still hoped it was just a coincidence. Days passed, and the disturbances grew more frequent and more violent. Heavy footsteps could be heard pacing the halls at night, even though no one was awake. Doors would slam shut on their own, and the lights would flicker wildly. The family's sense of normalcy was crumbling. One night, Emily was studying in her room when she heard a soft, rhythmic tapping from the other side of her wall. It sounded like someone was trying to communicate from the other side. When she put her ear to the wall, the tapping stopped. Fearful, she told her parents, but they were too exhausted from the constant disturbances to offer much comfort. Laura decided to consult a local historian, hoping to find some explanation for the strange occurrences. The historian, an elderly woman named Mrs. Whitaker, revealed that the house had a dark history. It had once belonged to a man named Victor Hawthorne, who was rumored to have been involved in occult practices. He had vanished mysteriously, and after his disappearance, the house had been abandoned. Armed with this unsettling information, the Bensons grew increasingly fearful. Mark decided to investigate the attic, hoping to find some clue or explanation. The attic was a dusty, forgotten space, filled with old trunks and cobwebs. As he rummaged through the attic, he found an old trunk that had been locked for years. Inside, he discovered a collection of strange artifacts, strange symbols, an old journal, and a set of ritualistic objects. The journal detailed occult rituals and practices, and the final pages were filled with frantic, illegible scrawls. It was clear that Victor Hawthorne had been dabbling in dark forces, trying to summon something beyond comprehension. Mark and Laura were horrified. They realized that whatever Victor had unleashed was still lingering in the house. Determined to rid their home of the malevolent presence, the family sought the help of a professional paranormal investigator. The investigator, a stern woman named Claire, set up cameras and recording equipment throughout the house. She conducted a thorough investigation, speaking to the unseen entity and performing various cleansing rituals. One night, as Claire conducted her investigation, the activity in the house reached a terrifying crescendo. The cameras captured chilling footage of objects moving on their own, and the recordings were filled with eerie whispers and distorted voices. The entity seemed to be growing more aggressive, reacting violently to Claire's attempts to communicate. During the investigation, Claire encountered something horrifying. In the basement, where the activity had been the most intense, she found an old, hidden door. Behind the door was a small room, empty except for a circle of old, rotting candles and an inscription written in blood on the walls. The inscription was a plea for release, a desperate attempt by Victor Hawthorne to contain the entity he had unleashed. Claire's attempts to perform a cleansing ritual in the basement only seemed to provoke the entity further. The house erupted into chaos. Furniture was overturned. Walls were scratched with dark, claw-like marks, and the temperature plummeted. The family was thrown into a state of panic. In the midst of the chaos, Emily found herself face to face with the entity. It was a dark, shapeless figure, its presence exuding an overwhelming sense of dread. The entity seemed to feed off their fear, growing stronger with every scream and cry. Desperate to end the nightmare, Emily made a decision. With Claire's guidance, the family gathered in the basement, where Emily read aloud from the journal, reciting the final, desperate plea for release. The room grew colder, and the air crackled with an oppressive energy. As she finished the last line, the entity let out a deafening scream, and the house fell silent. The next morning, the Bensons awoke to find the house calm. The oppressive atmosphere had lifted, and the disturbances had ceased. The family was exhausted but relieved. They had survived the ordeal, but the memory of the haunted house on Willow Lane would never fade. The old trunk was removed from the attic and destroyed, along with the cursed artifacts and the journal. The house was cleansed, and the family hoped to finally find peace. Yet, they knew that the darkness they had faced was not easily forgotten. The story of the poltergeist and the haunted house became a chilling legend in Brookwood, a reminder of the malevolent forces that can linger in the shadows, waiting to be unleashed. The Bensons moved away, leaving the house behind. It stood empty once more, its dark secrets sealed within its walls. The legend of the poltergeist lived on, a story whispered among locals and shared as a chilling reminder of the horrors that can lie hidden within the most unsuspecting places.